Hi, I'm Mohsen, and I'm so excited to welcome you to The Seeking Soul. This podcast is a space where we explore topics like philosophy, spirituality, and literature, often from perspectives you may not have encountered before. As someone who grew up traveling, I've had the privilege of witnessing the deep similarities between cultures and people, even when mainstream narratives focus on what divides us. As an Iranian American, I've always felt to share the beauty, wisdom, and lessons from my Eastern heritage with my Western community, and vice versa. My hope is to be a bridge between these two worlds, fostering the sense of oneness and unity. With the help of AI, this dream feels more achievable than ever. Using documents and notes, I've provided with the link of the sources in the description. Along the way, you might encounter ideas that feel new, challenging, or even uncomfortable, and that's okay. That's the purpose of this space, to listen with empathy and approach every perspective with love and curiosity. Welcome to the Seeking Soul. Hi, friends. Welcome to another episode of the Seeking Soul podcast. This is the 7th episode, and thank you again for tuning in. As we're going through a very uncertain times throughout the world, I think, I found a great resource that I read before, which was the Indian Home Rule book by Mahatma Gandhi. In this book, he talks about the modern world and the issues that he believes need to be corrected. And I think it's really becoming more relevant as the days go by. It refers to a lot of issues that we're facing day to day these times. And I found it very valuable in terms of there should be other ways to run our society based off of different merits. I highly welcome you to take a listen to this book, and I've also shared the link to download the book. And once again, please, if you find this useful, please refer it to friends, leave a comment, and subscribe. Thank you again. Enjoy this podcast.
Okay, picture this. Early 20th century India. You've got maybe, a few thousand British officials?
Yeah, not many in the grand scheme.
Running a subcontinent with, get this, around 320 million people. I mean, that power dynamic is just wild when you think about it.
It really is.
Welcome, everyone, to the Deep Dive. You know the drill. We take one fascinating source, dive deep, and pull out the key stuff you need to know.
And today, we're tackling Mahatma Gandhi's Indian Home Rule, specifically the 1922 edition.
Right. Think of this as your fast track to understanding a really pivotal vision for India's independence, straight from the source, pretty much.
And what's great about this text is that it catches Gandhi's thinking relatively early on. It was first out in 1909, then reprinted in 22.
So it's not just about how to get independence, is it?
Not at all. It lays out his plan for self-rule, sure, but it's also this very sharp critique of Western civilization as a whole.
Okay, so our mission today, for you listening, is to really get into Gandhi's core arguments for what he called home rule, or Swaraj. We'll look at why he was so critical of the British, yes, but also Western society generally.
And crucially, the methods he was advocating, the nonviolent approach, which was pretty revolutionary.
Exactly. We want to give you a clearer view on this massive historical shift.
So where do we start? I think with the immediate need for independence he saw.
Right. And his core idea, maybe the most famous one, was that India didn't need violence. Its biggest weapon was unity.
Absolutely, unity. He believed that if 320 million people decided something, nothing could really stop them.
He even quotes Seeley, doesn't he? Saying that being ruled by foreigners just makes a nation, deteriorate.
Yeah, it sets up his whole argument about India's inherent strength just waiting to be tapped.
So the sheer numbers game, 320 million versus a few thousand. His logic was if they all just kind of agreed,
they could basically decide their own future without firing a shot, as it were.
Now, I know what some people might be thinking. Sounds a bit idealistic. Just agree.
Oh, for sure. And maybe it was idealistic, but you have to understand this nonviolent unity was like the absolute bedrock of his philosophy back then. It's key to everything else.
Okay, so building on that nonviolence.
Yeah.
he tackles the people who did believe in force.
Right. He kind of splits them into two groups. There's the small bunch,
Mm-hmm.
ready to actually do something violent.
Okay.
And then there's this much larger group who maybe they wouldn't act themselves, but their belief in violence, even just thinking it's the only way, he felt that actually stopped them from trying other things, constructive things, sacrifice.
So even just believing in violence was a problem for him.
A huge problem. He basically says, look, there's no hope for rebuilding India unless we totally ditch this worship of force. Everything has to be built on a nonviolent footing.
That wasn't just tactics for him then. It was like fundamental.
Exactly. For the soul of the nation he envisioned.
This brings up the organizations already around, like the Indian National Congress. The text has this sort of Q&A format sometimes, right, with a reader.
It does. And the reader voices some skepticism, suggesting, that the younger generation felt the Congress was maybe too establishment, even helping the British stay in power inadvertently.
But Gandhi, writing as the editor, pushes back.
He does. He defends the Congress, especially the early figures, people like Hume, Dadabhai Naoroji. He gives them credit for laying the groundwork, for making the home rule conversation even possible.
That's interesting because the Congress then was mostly asking for reforms, not full independence yet.
Well, generally, yes. They were working within the system. So Gandhi's critique, coming from this more radical, nonviolent independence angle, but also defending the early Congress, it shows the complexity.
Yeah, you see this tension, don't you? Between the old guard and the new ideas bubbling up. Gandhi's sort of navigating that.
Precisely. Acknowledging the past while pushing for a very different future.
Okay, so nonviolent unity, questioning force, navigating the existing politics. But what was the actual goal? Swaraj, home rule. What did that mean?
Well, that's the thing. The text points out there wasn't one clear answer floating around. Everyone wanted it, but what was it?
The reader character has an idea, though.
Yeah, the reader initially thinks, okay, Swaraj means booting the English out and then basically setting up India like Canada or South Africa.
So parliament, army, navy, the whole shebang.
Exactly. All the symbols of a Western nation state. He calls it Englistan, basically English rule, just without the actual English people.
Englistan. I like that. But Gandhi wasn't having it?
Not at all. He flat out rejects that. That's not real Swaraj, he says. It's just swapping one master for another, essentially. His vision was way, way deeper.
Which leads us nicely into his big critique, not just of British rule, but of Western civilization.
And yeah, it is big. Sweeping, really. He starts with England itself, calling its condition pitiable.
Pitiable. Strong word.
Very. He uses these metaphors. Parliament is a sterile woman, a prostitute.
Wow. Okay. Why?
Because, in his view, it didn't have its own will. It just responded to pressure, changed ministers constantly, didn't stand for anything solid. He quotes Carlyle calling it the talking shop of the world. All talk, no real substance.
And the voters?
Easily swayed, he thought, manipulated by newspapers that weren't always honest, public opinion just swinging back and forth like a pendulum.
But it goes beyond politics, right? It's the whole lifestyle.
Oh, absolutely. He argues Western civilization is obsessed with the body, with material comfort. Better houses, fancier clothes, more powerful weapons, like revolvers, he mentioned.
And machinery, factories.
Big targets for him. He saw factory work as degrading, making people worse than beasts, enslaved by money.
Railways, too, surprisingly. We usually see those as progress.
Not Gandhi, not in this context. He saw them as tools for British control, helping them move troops and goods. He even argued they spread plague and made famines worse.
How did he figure that on famines?
Because railways let merchants ship grain away to wherever the price was highest, instead of keeping it for local people who were starving. A really different take.
And communications, like the post.
Even that. He mentions the penny post being used just as much for insults and abuse as for anything good. It's this relentless focus on the downsides of modernity.
And underlying all this material focus.
A lack of morality and religion, in his view. He saw it leading to immorality disguised as morality, irreligion presented as progress. People becoming half mad, he says, focused on fleeting pleasures, losing real strength.
He even mentions women being forced into factories as a symptom of this.
Yes, it's a total package critique. His conclusion is pretty stark. India isn't just being held down by the British military or government.
It's being ground down by this whole modern Western way of life.
Exactly. That's the real enemy, in a way.
So if this Western civilization is so flawed, and the British are part of it, how did they even manage to conquer and hold India? He doesn't buy the won it by the sword argument.
No, he completely rejects that. His line is blunt. We alone keep them. Meaning it's the Indians themselves, by cooperating with or aspiring to this flawed civilization, who allow the British to stay. The motivation for the British being there, he argues, is primarily commerce, economic benefit. He uses the Transvaal as an example.
So it's India's adoption or temptation towards this modern way of life that's the real weakness.
That's his argument. It weakens India from the inside, making foreign rule possible.
Okay. This ties into his views on religion and the Pax Britannica, the British peace. He gets accused of promoting superstition, right?
Yeah, he addresses that charge of encouraging charlatanism in religion, but he flips it. He says, look, even the terrible things done sometimes in the name of religion, they're ultimately less damaging than the slow, corrupting fire of civilization.
That's a pretty provocative comparison.
It is. And on the Pax Britannica, the supposed peace the British brought, he doesn't see it as real peace. He kind of downplays the fear people had of older groups like thugs and Pindaris.
He says Indians weren't cowards.
Right. He argues true strength comes from not being afraid, and that dealing with those internal threats, those were fellow countrymen after all, was part of India's own journey to strength. Conquering fear was key.
Okay, let's dig into some specific critiques he had. Railways, we mentioned. What about lawyers and doctors? These seem like pillars of modern society.
He goes after them hard. Railways, as we said. Tools for control, spread plague, worsened famine by letting grain be sold far away, and he even disputes they helped create Indian unity.
He thought India was already unified.
Yes, culturally and spiritually. He points to the holy places across India that people traveled to long before railways as proof of an existing national consciousness. Railways, he felt, actually created new divisions.
And lawyers.
Oh boy. He sees them as having enslaved India. How? By encouraging arguments, especially between Hindus and Muslims, he claims, and by making everyone dependent on the British court system.
So they profited from conflict.
That's his view. Advancing quarrels, enriching themselves, ruining families in the process, and ultimately just strengthening the British legal framework over traditional ways of sorting things out.
Which he preferred, even if it meant, fighting.
He argues that settling disputes through fighting or within the family or community was actually less unmanly than relying on these foreign courts.
Wow. Okay. And doctors. Surely medicine is a good thing.
Not modern Western medicine, in his view here. He sees it as part of the same destructive system, this Upas tree he calls modern civilization.
Why destructive?
Because, he argues, it encourages indulgence. You get sick because you overeat or live badly, then the doctor gives you a pill so you can go back to doing it. It fixes the symptom, not the cause, and weakens self-control, weakens the mind.
He also had religious objections.
Yes, mentioning things like animal fats or alcohol, sometimes used in Western medicines, which could violate religious rules for Hindus or Muslims. Ultimately, he saw doctors as deepening India's slavery by making people dependent, and motivated more by money and status than real service.
Okay, so if Western civilization, including its professions, is so bad, what's the alternative? What's true civilization for Gandhi?
Right, the positive vision. He argues that India already has a true, evolved civilization, one that's basically unparalleled.
And what defines it?
Its focus is on morality, on ethical life, on mastering your own mind, your passions. That, he says, is good conduct, and that is civilization, not material stuff.
So rejecting that Western restlessness, the constant wanting more.
Exactly. He praises India's traditional ways, the same simple cottages for generations, indigenous education systems focused on character, limits on competition, fair wages set by the community, not just market forces.
And the rejection of machinery we talked about.
He frames it as wisdom from their forefathers. They saw that chasing machinery and luxury would make people slaves and destroy their moral fiber, so they deliberately limited it.
He also talks about leadership, doesn't he?
Yeah, contrasting India's traditional respect for spiritual figures, rishis and fakirs, over kings and emperors. He points out that in traditional India, courts, lawyers, doctors, they existed, but they were dependents of the people, not masters. Justice was generally fair, and ordinary people lived pretty independently. That, for him, was true home rule already existing at the village level.
So where modern ways haven't penetrated?
India remains fundamentally sound, in his view.
But he must have known people would point out flaws in Indian society, too, like child marriage, treatment of women.
He absolutely acknowledges those. He calls them defects, real problems that need reform. But crucially, he argues they aren't the essence of Indian civilization, which he sees as fundamentally aimed at elevating the moral being and based on a belief in God. Western civilization, he contrasts, tends towards immorality, while Indian civilization has the capacity within itself to fix its flaws.
Okay, quite a contrast he's drawing.
Yeah.
So given all this, how does India actually get free, according to this vision?
It's actually quite simple in his logic. Freedom comes when you remove the cause of slavery.
Which isn't just the British being there.
No, it's India's internal state, its adoption of or entanglement with modern civilization. So Swaraj, true self-rule or self-control, is something Indians can achieve within themselves.
It's not primarily about kicking the English out.
Not as the first step. The first step is for Indians to become, as he puts it, Indianized again, to change their thinking, their actions, reject the harmful parts of modern civilization. If Indians do that,
Then the English will either have to leave or they'll have to change how they operate in India.
that's the core idea. And crucially, this transformation cannot be achieved through violence or assassination. He explicitly rejects that path, saying it would make India unholy and wouldn't bring real happiness. He mentions Italy's unification, Mazzini and Garibaldi, but says India's situation is different.
So if not violence, then what?
Then soul force, or love force, what we generally call passive resistance. He argues this is infinitely superior to brute force. It's indestructible.
One negative cures 36 diseases. What does that mean?
It suggests that refusing to cooperate with evil, that single act of principled refusal, can overcome a multitude of problems caused by brute force or injustice. It's about actively using truth and love to appeal to the opponent's conscience.
So passive resistance means disobeying unjust laws.
Yes. Consciously, openly, and willingly accepting the punishment, fines, imprisonment, whatever it is. That, for him, is exercising soul force. It's not disloyalty. It's actually a higher form of being law-abiding because you're obeying your conscience, a higher law.
He really flips the script on what law-abiding means.
Completely. He says it's unmanly to obey laws that are repugnant to your conscience. And this passive resistance, he stresses, isn't a weapon for the weak. It requires immense courage, more courage arguably than violence.
Does physical fitness play a role?
Interestingly, yes, he connects body and mind. A weak body, he suggests, often leads to weakness of will, makes it harder to endure suffering for a cause. So he calls for Indians to improve their physique, partly by getting rid of harmful customs like infant marriage or overly luxurious living that weakens them.
And what qualities does a passive resistor need?
He lists several key ones: perfect chastity or self-control, adopting poverty or simplicity, always following truth, and cultivating complete fearlessness. These are tough ideals, but he argues they are valuable goals even for someone who might still be considering armed struggle. They build inner strength regardless.
Okay, that's the core method. What about other tools like education or technology, machinery?
Right. Education first. He's critical of just focusing on literacy. Learning to read and write, he says, isn't education in itself. It can be used for good or ill.
So what is real education?
Character building, that's
Yeah.
primary. He critiques Western-style education being imposed on India as basically enslaving minds. He thinks India's ancient village school system, focused on ethics and practical skills, was sufficient.
What about English education? Did he see any use for it?
Maybe a little for practical needs, communicating with the British perhaps, but giving it to millions. He saw that as enslaving them, making them dependent on foreign ideas and language. He even says it's sad they have to discuss home rule in English.
Good point.
He laments that India adopts systems Europe itself is discarding. His solution: revive Indian languages, translate useful English works into them, make ethical or religious education central, and promote Hindi as a common national language.
And machinery. We know he disliked it, but in the context of achieving freedom.
He saw it as having actively impoverished India, pointing to Manchester cloth destroying local weavers. He believed it was destructive in Europe too. The best thing, he felt, was never to have started down that path.
He pitied factory owners.
He expresses pity, yeah, but urges them not to expand. The real power, he says, lies with the people they can just stop buying machine-made goods. That's Swadeshi self-reliance applied to economics.
So if you give up railways, you'd have to give up trams, electric lights too.
Logically, yes, if they are part of that same industrial complex he rejects. He calls machinery a potential snake hole, looks harmless but contains danger.
But wait, isn't this book itself printed using machinery?
Huh. Yes, he acknowledges that irony. He calls it using poison to kill poison. a necessary evil in the current situation to spread the message against the very system it relies on, but definitely not an endorsement.
Okay, so bringing it all together,
Yeah.
his conclusion. He wasn't trying to start a new political party.
No, his aim wasn't about creating another faction. It was about identifying what is right, fundamentally.
And he had messages for the existing groups.
Yes. To the moderates who focused on petitions and appeals, he basically said, that's beneath our dignity. Stop begging.
And to the extremists who lean towards violence.
His message was clear. Violence is unnecessary and harmful. There's a better way, soul force.
He also lays out conditions for the British if they wanted to stay in India.
He does. It's quite demanding. He says they'd have to completely give up the idea of ruling for commercial profit. They'd have to accept Indian civilization as superior for India. Respect religious customs. No beef or pork consumption, for instance. Restore traditional schools and courts. Learn Hindi. Stop pouring money into railways and the military. Maybe even rely on Indians for defense if needed. Stop importing European cloth. Basically, align their interests entirely with India's.
And if not,
Then, he implies, Indians committed to Swaraj will simply make British rule impossible through non-cooperation and passive resistance.
and his final message is really to Indians themselves.
Yes, especially those educated in the Western style who still wanted home rule. He says true leadership won't come from them unless they have real love for India, real faith in its own civilization, and the inner strength that comes from soul force, not brute force.
He calls for specific actions.
Yeah, practical steps for everyone. Lawyers should stop helping the British courts and mediate disputes instead. Doctors should focus on traditional remedies and prevention. Rich people should use their wealth for promoting Swadeshi industries. Every Indian should learn to weave, practice Swadeshi, and embrace passive resistance. It's about personal transformation and action, not just talk. It all comes back to those core ideas for real home rule. Self-rule meaning self-control first, passive resistance, soul force or love force, Swadeshi self-reliance in everything, acting from duty, not anger or revenge.
And importantly, rejecting the bad parts of English civilization, but not hating the English people themselves.
Exactly. It's a high bar. He basically says achieving this kind of Swaraj is a lifelong commitment to living by these principles.
So wrapping this deep dive up, for you listening, the big takeaways from Gandhi's Indian home rule are really his early powerful case for nonviolent independence.
That deep, searching critique of Western civilization and its impact.
And this constant emphasis on inner transformation, self-rule, Swadeshi, as the only way to achieve genuine freedom.
Yeah, exploring this text really gives you a window into the foundational thinking behind one of the 20th century's most significant movements. You get a much richer sense of where it all started.
Definitely. And it leaves us with something to think about, doesn't it? Here's a thought. In our world today, so interconnected, globalized, what do Gandhi's ideas about civilization, about progress, about self-rule, how do they speak to the challenges we face now, globally, nationally, even personally?
That's a great question to ponder. His ideas about materialism, morality, nonviolence, they certainly haven't gone away. We definitely encourage everyone to chew on that. Maybe even go look at the text itself and think about how relevant that 1922 vision might still be.